switching at your window?
I left my house at
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Selectmen's Roundtable. I'm Beth Cassavant, and I'm joined by my colleagues, John Samia, John LeBeau, and Mo DiPaolo, and we have an action-packed 28-minute show to bring you tonight. We have lots to talk about. It's been a busy fall with a special town meeting that wrapped up on October 21st. It was a quick meeting. It was only an hour long, barely an hour long, I think, of actual business, but we actually accomplished quite a bit, and I wanted to spend some time talking about the articles that were of most interest, I think, to the public, namely the one about the water and addressing the brown water, the flushing that needs to be done. It turns out that we've kind of been playing a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole where the brown water just keeps getting moved around, the sediment keeps getting moved around, but there's a great plan in place now with unidirectional flushing that's I think going to be the solution. We're working with a consultant, and work, you were saying, is going to get started, sounds like tomorrow.
Yes, today's Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday, what the date tomorrow?
Today's the 6th, tomorrow's November 7th.
Okay, so November 7th, the contractor is gonna start I guess people from the water department are gonna start exercising the valves to identify the ones that there will be a problem opening and closing. And then from there, sometime next week, they'll start actually doing the flushing, starting from the plant on Main Street and working out to the areas that were most heavily affected, which is like the northern part of town, going up over Cypress, Gulf, into Longfellow, and that whole area is going to be the first area that's going to be done. And they're going to continue working throughout the town until the weather gets so cold that they can't because of issues with, obviously, ice on the street. So it is, it's a proven method. The ice picking was good to get rid of the real heavy concentrations of it, but to really flush it out of the system, as you said, we need to do it all in one direction instead of having some of it come out and the rest of it gets spread out through the system. So
Right, problems just get popping up in other places. And some of these valves haven't been exercised in quite some time, so I think part of the plan also is once we know which ones need to be replaced, that there'll be a plan in place to exercise them on every 3 years each valve?
Well, we might have to do it maybe every year or two, because it's still a process of getting it out. There's no manganese coming out of the plant, but there's still a lot of manganese in the pipes from built up over however many years. And it's going to take a little bit to get it out. But yeah, once it's, from what the consultant said, once we've done it and we've gotten the water, gotten that stuff out of the pipes, then maybe it would be like a 2 or 3 year cycle that would be done.
And when, back at our October 8th meeting, part of the cost will be that when these valves are exercised, replacement of up to 20% of the valves. They'll be looking at, and hopefully as time goes on, that cost will decrease over time. But as you had mentioned, a lot of these valves it took a little while to identify where they are. They're either maybe paved over or there's dirt around them, so the first time through. Will be interesting that we're going through some of this data. There are 992 fire hydrants in town. There are, I think, over 76 days it will take to flush the 12 zones out. So it will be, as Mo had said, every few years that this will happen. In the first couple of years, there'll be more sediment coming out of the system. But one of the large takeaways is that unlike the flushing with fire hydrants, where it sometimes just pushes around the sediment, this should provide, with the velocity of the water coming out and the moving around of the valves, should be the long-term solution, the proactive solution for our residents.
It's still going to come out of the fire hydrants, but it's just,
correct.
So people will still see that. But I think, like you were saying, the velocity at which the water's going to be moving and the way that they've mapped it out so that they're going through in a zone sort of fashion, so that you know one zone is clean and they're going to start from the plant and keep working out so that you're only moving clean water, so you kind of know where you are.
As
in
opposed
the
to,
process.
like you said, as opposed to just opening up the hydrant and letting water come out,
Mm-hmm.
almost like back flushing your pool.
The way we were doing it, not the ice picking, but just flushing the hydrants, which has been a standard for forever. It works, but it takes a lot longer and it wastes a lot more water. This one's more effective because it restricts where the water can go, as you said.
So at town meeting, a part of Article 3, the water quality initiatives, this was one of them. The unidirectional flushing, also there was PFAS and hexchrome. So there were a couple areas, I think $865,000 of that article is going towards water quality initiatives. So I don't know if we wanted to talk about the others as well.
Well, actually, those two are going to be pilot programs
Yep.
for the hexchrome and for the PFAS. PFAS, we actually we know two technologies that are proven that work, and they're relatively simple. For the simple explanation is they're a type of carbon filter. That doesn't mean it's inexpensive to build the facility to do it, but it's a proven technology. Air and some of the Air Shirley, some of the places up in there
Hudson was another place.
that have heavy concentrations of PFAS have been using it. They got on it within the past year, 6 months, some of them. It's very effective. They've got it down to non-detectable limits. So we know it works. We just have to find out what the right size is and what the configuration is going to be for us. And then hexchrome, we started the pilot program. There wasn't enough hexchrome, as it turned out, in the wells, or the well that we were testing, and they had to stop. So now they've got another way to do it, and they're going to start that again. So both of those will happen, they'll start in the spring.
The tough thing about the hexchrome is harder, I think, to get the levels low enough that the public feels confident in the water. The nice thing about the PFAS, if there is a silver lining, is that it can be taken out, removed from the water. And the PFAS is a very, to me, I find that to just be a really scary substance because it's everywhere. And I think one of the comments at town meeting was if your community doesn't have PFAS in their water, it's because you didn't test for it.
Right.
And I think we're just going to keep finding more and more communities that are realizing that they have levels probably that are a lot higher than ours. I think we're in if there's a good place, if the levels are below.
Well, you couldn't even test for the limits that
Right.
The government wants us to get down to. The federal government's looking at a limit, maybe lowering the limit. The state is going to lower the limit.
20.
You couldn't even detect with the technology, and there's only a couple of places in the country that actually can do it. So, yeah, the technology advances, and I think Mr. Mizikar had said at town meeting, the more the technology advances to be able to detect substances in water, you might find more things that need to come out. But
Yeah.
we have to do what we have to do. We've got to get clean water, and we just have to address it, and hopefully by being proactive, we'll be able to address those problems before they actually do get bad.
And the other thing with PFAS too is that the EPA level is 70 parts per trillion. The state level, which I think is not going to be official until January, is 20 parts per trillion.
Yeah.
And the water that was tested in Shrewsbury was 13.56 parts per trillion, so it's still below. Nevertheless, at town meeting, this was information that was recently learned and immediately put in front of the residents of town and also released to the residents of town. One question that came up that I think is important too relates to whether or not there was an article about PFAS being in artificial turf, and that question was asked as well, both about the Shrewsbury and St. John's turf fields as well. And Jeff Howland had answered those questions, saying that the runoff actually doesn't go towards the water, the aquifer, but goes the other way. I think that's also important for town residents to understand that if there's runoff, it's not going in the water.
Right. And the other thing about the fields, and I don't know the chemistry and the chemical makeup of the field, but the first test we did to see if we had the PFAS, the field wasn't even in yet.
Right.
So to think that the water could have migrated that far, that quickly, if there was anything in it, it's not realistic. Not to say that over time, if there was a problem, it could. It wasn't even in yet. So it was there, We just didn't know it.
Right.
And that's what a lot of cities and towns are finding out.
Yeah, another quote was an emerging contaminant that will be nationwide. So
Oh, it's everywhere. I mean, it's unfortunate, but yeah, this is the new chemical du jour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pervasive, I think. I
And
think
it's
that's
not
what we're
just,
gonna
it's
see.
bottled water too. There was something over the summer about certain bottled water having a high level of PFAS, and pregnant women and nursing mothers were
there was-
advised not to drink it. So it's not just public drinking water either. You need to know what's in your bottled water
And
as
bottled
well.
water doesn't have to be tested to the same standards. I'm sure a lot of companies do, but I'm sure there's also a lot of companies that don't. But it's in that water, and there was a place, I don't know if it was over the summer, maybe in the spring, that was supplying Stop and Shop and all the major
That's the one I
chains.
was, yeah,
And they ended up shutting down.
spring.
They
yeah.
did.
They were up in
just-
Haverhill, I think.
Yeah, they just shut down because they didn't know if they could get down to that level. And that apparently came out, well, that probably was at detectable levels. That was pretty high, but it's just incredible. It's every time you think you've addressed a problem, you find another one, so.
And the important takeaway too for Article 3 is that the water quality initiatives, in addition to those 3 items, it's also leaving some funding for anything else that comes up.
Right.
Hopefully we'll be able to address the issues. We also, I don't remember the date of the meeting, was it that same one, October 8th, that we approved some adjustments to our abatement policy, kind of fine-tuned it.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, it was the,
To make it a little bit easier for residents to apply, but also to sort of account for the people that are experiencing ongoing issues with their water. And a lot of those are people that we personally have spoken with, or that we know are in contact with the town manager or with the water department, that they're having just repeated issues. Many of them are in the areas that are going to be part of the unidirectional flushing first. So hopefully that we can get those things resolved. But we do have the new policy, and it is on the website underneath the Board of Selectmen policies. It just talks about how to go about filing for an abatement if you did have to run your water for an extraordinarily long time, and being able to get some sort of credit on your water bill.
Right, and part of the way that's gonna be analyzed is looking historically of what the water bills were, and if there's an obvious spike, then you may or may not, depending on how big it was, you may or may not be eligible for it. But if you think your bills went up a lot, you should check and apply to the water department, and they'll check it, and they'll let you know if it qualifies. But there are people definitely who are gonna qualify.
right, it's historical as well as perspective. So if
Right.
you know you need to run water to get sediment out of your pipes as well, notifying the water and sewer department in advance as well, and then there'll be an adjustment depending upon whatever they agree to. But that's also another way at water usage to make sure if you're trying to get the sediment out of your pipes that you won't be charged.
So next on our special town meeting, I think things that are of interest to the community, we approved, our town meeting approved funding for a study of the historical structures in the community. People might recall that there has been a group working on identifying historic structures and then finding ways to preserve those structures, and they did have an article set to go for the annual town meeting last May, but then decided to pull it after just hearing some of the concerns from homeowners and from the community, and wanting to take the time to really revise it. And so we were actually finally able to get an article on this fall town meeting to provide some funding for a consultant to come in and take a look at some of those structures and really identify which ones we're talking about when we talk about preservation of historic structures in the community. So.
Right, right. One of the questions that came up was how many properties are there really affected? And at this point, nobody really knows, so, but the funding should take care of about 200 houses, which should be somewhere in the range, or 200 structures. They don't just have to be houses. And then we'll see where that leads. But there are towns that have done this already, and they have a notebook, basically. And you have an old house, you wanna know if it's historically significant, they look in the book. And they tell you, which I think gives people a lot more comfort that they'll know if it is or it isn't. I mean, there might be some gray areas, but right now it seems very open-ended. And then there are gonna be issues that are gonna have to be dealt with if somebody comes forward with a demolition delay, a historic preservation bylaw, whatever you wanna call it. There's still gonna be, there are other questions, but at least we'll know the amount of structures that are out there or properties that are out there that could be affected. And then it's, how are we gonna address it? So it's a start, it's good.
This is an inventory, correct?
This is an inventory.
It isn't a determination if something is historically significant.
No, but it's an inventory, well,
Right.
it's an inventory, yes, it isn't definitive, but what they'll do.
It'll establish features?
It'll establish, no, it's going to, well, okay, yes, it'll establish, what's the right word? Preferably preserved or something like that because of features. It could be somebody lived there, something was invented there, a certain type of architecture, and that kind of stuff. Say, look, these potentially have some historic significance. And right now, we don't know. Just because a house is 100 years old, it doesn't mean it's historically significant. It's trying to narrow it down more. It's not an absolute, but at least it gives some sense of the scope of the properties that could be affected by this.
I think the Historic Commission has been working on sort of creating an inventory. I know there's been volunteers in our community that have been doing this kind of work on their own, but again, that kind of becomes a bit subjective, and having a consultant come in who has experience, and they're gonna be working, I believe, with the Historic Commission on this, so that they're kind of looking at the data that's already been collected and making sure that, things are not being repeated or duplicated if it's not necessary to do so. I think that's probably the best way to really figure out what we're looking at. So otherwise, makes it a little bit more objective instead of subjective.
Yeah, to maximize the funds that were allocated, and there are consultants, it sounds like smaller and some are larger, but to be able to really focus at the task at hand and utilize the efforts, the folks have already worked on this and used that data, whether they're completely polished at this point or not, it gives a pretty strong starting point rather than starting from the beginning, and it's a collaborative process too. I think that part of the community folks want to say as to what they value, and I think it's important going forward to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say that, I mean, this conversation, this subject has gone on, discussed for a long time, but certainly, 10, 12 years ago, I mean, people came to the town asking for establishment of a historical commission, and one of the primary, if not the primary purpose of said commission was to do this inventory.
Yeah, it was 13 years ago.
Yeah, so,
Is it
I mean,
really?
unfortunately, time went by, reasons I don't know, the commission was not able to come up with a final inventory or a verifiable inventory. So X number of years later, we're at town meeting looking for an appropriation. So at least, as you mentioned, some objectivity, and the question that's been, was asked a long time ago will finally get answered. Then we'll have to decide, and by we,
Right.
I don't just mean the board, I mean the town, will have to decide how we want to deal with that, how we want to react to that.
Right.
Right, because like you said, just because a house is 100 years old doesn't make it significant historically. And then every day, really, that inventory could grow if that's your only criteria for a
Well,
house being
that's gonna,
significant.
once we get that, that'll lead to the other discussion of what are the parameters and what's the timeframes, and but at least this will give us an idea of what, at least we think, what we're talking about.
I mean, think about it's a long way to go, but think about 100 years from, say, 1990, when we were building like crazy. There'll be so many historic houses in town then. Any of the houses that we live in that are still there.
Mine won't be there.
No, but there will be, I mean, it's scalable, so, 100
Right.
years ago from now, there just weren't that many houses, there weren't that many people in Shrewsbury.
Right.
100 years ago in the past, 100 years ago in the future, looking back to today, 37,000, 12, 13,000 houses?
And even think already, houses that were built in the 50s,
Yeah, they're halfway there, or more than halfway there.
that we, yeah, they're already there. There's 60 years, and there are some towns, it's rolling 75 years, 100 years. So there'd be a point in town where, whoa, there'd be a lot of houses.
13 years is a long time to be working on this, but I think it's really important to find where we as a community are comfortable drawing the line on what's historic and what we want to do to preserve it, and
Right.
taking into account
Right.
rights of property owners and making sure that it's equitable and fair to people. And that's just how we do things here.
Yep.
I think we're very thoughtful in that regard. So as we move along our show here, we have one more really important topic to talk about, and it's what everybody seems to be buzzing about, and that's the trash bags and the Pay It program, and this decision that seems to be upon us, as unsavory as it is to discuss, that after 11 years of the program, it seems the time has come to look at the rate of the bags and see whether or not it's appropriate to raise them. And it certainly elicits strong feelings in people, and rightfully so. I think we've enjoyed an 11-year run of the bags being at the price that they are at, and it's just become something that has to be talked about and discussed, and I think we've been really trying to do that,
Trying to figure out the right way to move ahead.
the balance. Because again, you hear from people that every time you turn around, they feel like there's another fee, and I feel like that's very true in life in general, not just in life in a town or a community. There's just
You know, it's funny, now the bags, and who knows where we're gonna end up at this point, but the bags haven't been raised for 11 to 12 years. They've been steady. And so people saying, well, geez, you're gonna raise them, but yeah, okay, it's gonna go up, but the first time that I was on a board that raised water rates, they hadn't been raised for 22 years because of the growth in the town or whatever. We were generating enough income, we didn't have to do it. 22 years, and people were complaining that we were raising the water rates. It's like, at some point, when your costs go up, you're gonna have to have more income or you're not gonna be able to sustain the program. So, I don't wanna see my prices go up either, but on anything, just like everybody else, it'd be great to have everything, all your costs stay the same, but that's not the way things work, unfortunately. I think the town's had a history of, we don't raise the rates unless we need to. And we don't impose new fees unless there's a real reason to do it. And it's always painful for us and for the public to have that discussion when it becomes necessary. I mean, the way I see it, there are several options. Number one, you just say we're not going to have town trash pickup, which I think is completely unpalatable. It's one of the main town services that people identify as being a key town service, which I agree it is. We could cover the cost of the new contract, which would have gone up no matter who got the contract. This is not vendor specific. This is because costs have gone up, cost of disposing of recycling. We never had any cost of disposing of recycling. We only had cost for pickup. Now we have to pay. So costs went up. So it didn't make it, this is vendor neutral. I mean, obviously people bid and it raised the prices, but the floor was gonna be at least 20% because that was the lowest bid. But, so you can make up this difference now, this potential deficit that we're gonna have, either by raising the bag fees, taking it all out of the tax levy, doing partial, raising the tax fees, partial tax levy. There are several choices, but one way or another, if people want to have municipal trash pickup, the money's gonna have to come from somewhere. Might be more visible to somebody if they're paying it in a bag fee, but if you're paying it in your taxes, you're still paying it. It's gotta come from somewhere. So I think that's where we are. And how do you balance, the cost increase, what people think they can afford, and what you need to raise? It's complicated. It's not as easy as just, okay, we're gonna raise the price.
And that's a question that was asked to the town manager at our meeting on October 22nd about the opportunity cost. What would we lose if we fund it from the levy? What wouldn't we fund? So that's a question we haven't really discussed yet, and we will be at our upcoming meetings to have that conversation. It could come down to priorities. It could come down and balancing the needs of our residents together with the total basket of services that we can provide.
I think you raise a good point, Mo. I mean, I'm just thinking that through. So we've identified a deficit. We need to fill the deficit. People are taking issue, or some people, a significant number of people are taking issue with the concept of raising the bag fee. So let's take the other approach. We roll it into the taxes. First of all, we're limited by 2.5. We pretty much spend to the levy. So it's not that we can just add it in. There has to be a corresponding either reduction, or you have to identify something that's not going to go up to balance it out. It's going to affect the other services that we provide. Solid waste disposal is becoming a rapidly much more expensive process globally. We're hearing China doesn't want to take the recycling. That's their prerogative, isn't it?
It isn't that they just don't want to, they stop.
Yeah, well, they don't want to and they've stopped. We don't necessarily, we don't want to become the receiver of all this material. So, it's a little bit of a culture change. Honestly, there was a culture change when we put the bags in the first time. That culture change was less trash was thrown away in Shrewsbury. Significant amount of less trash was thrown away. Now, I know some people will say it was thrown on the side of the road. We didn't have,
There was no
we've had
evidence of that.
issues, but nothing dramatic. People are gonna take it to work and throw it in the dumpster. Okay, maybe they do, but still, it's not, I would think the significant reduction is that people started thinking a little more about trash and what they were gonna put in the blue bag, what they could recycle. Certainly, the pink bag option is not the panacea, but there's a lot of stuff that can go out into those pink bags now at no charge.
That's completely no charge. You don't pay for the bags.
Right.
We don't pay to dispose of it.
But the whole, solid waste, it's not as between the environmental concerns, between just capacity of handling material. It's now an expensive commodity to deal with, and we are probably going to face increases with every contract.
And we are out of time.
Oh, my goodness.
That was our final thought.
Wow.
I was watching the clock tick down.
Oh, I'm sorry. You
No,
should
that's
have just
okay.
Shut me down.
No, because you were saying really great things, and I think that that's a great place to end.
So we haven't gotten the official that we're clear, but it appears we're at the end of this show.
That flew by.
I'm seeing a signal that we can continue. We wrap it up,
You see
okay.
the
Oh, I
wrap it
thought
up
we did
signal.
wrap it up. Oh, my God.
Well, we'll just have to do this again.
Right.
Because I know we've left everyone now on a cliffhanger as to whether or not bag rates are going to go up. So please join us again next time on Selectmen's Roundtable.